Hello, today we will be talking about controlling cocci in calves. I'm Kat Hart, I work at the George Farm Vet and also cultivate CPD. So let's go on to the next slide. Here we go. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, first of all, we'll go through what is cocci, which calves are at risk, and the importance of the balance of the immunity and challenge that they face. Then we'll do a section on the importance of hygiene. This really cannot be underestimated. How we can group animals and also how we can test for cocci to see if it is present. And then lastly, the area I'm sure we're all looking forward to is the treatment options, but also thrown in there some longer term solutions and also how we can monitor and measure this going forward. So that's the plan of today. A bit more about me. I'm a dairy farmer's daughter that used to show quite a lot of Holsteins. That's the top left-hand picture. Since then, I've now been a vet at the George for 10 years and really focusing a lot of my time on young stock care. The last 8 of those, up to about probably half of my clinical time now, being purely focused on young stock consultancy type work. Outside of work, I have a young family, so there's a picture of the 2 boys, and I also run Angus suckler herd and try and run that regeneratively. So I've got some sheep, some bees and some market garden as well, just to keep me busy. So that's a bit about me. So a bit more about cocci, and you think, why has she put an onion picture there? So it is a single-celled parasite and it is spread through the fecal-oral transmission. So that is really why hygiene is so important. It's quite a complex parasite, and this is why I put the onion picture there. It's got a really complex shell and is really difficult to disinfect. So quite similar to crypto, how we get on top of this from a biosecurity point of view is quite difficult. So if we can imagine it like an onion with lots of different layers of shells, different disinfectants work on different shells, so it does need to be quite specific. So a bit of a busy slide, and I will try and explain my way through it. So the life cycle of cocci is quite complex. We have the life cycle that appears within the animal's guts, as well as what happens outside, and it's sexual as well as asexual reproduction. So you can follow this through and read it by all means, but basically within the guts we have multiple different stages, going from your sporozoites to your metazoites, and then producing the oocyte itself, and that produces massive destruction within those gut walls, how they burst out and basically ulcerate some of those gut walls, which is why you can sometimes see blood within the feces, and you'll often see straining and quite a lot of pain linked to this in the more severe stages of the disease. But also outside of the animal we have some stages as well, so it can be changed by weather, particularly temperature and humidity, but generally within the housed calf we deem it as an all year round disease, unlike particularly lambs, which is very seasonal and really specific to sort of the month of May. Within the housed calf it's a lot more all year round. And you can really see with some of these histology slides, it's quite an old paper back in the 70s, but you can really see how the villi are totally destructed. We get a lot of sloughing, and you can actually see that the sort of strains of the metazoites, they're just arrowed. So we get a lot of growth loss. We see the scour, which can be dark and can have blood present. We see a massive drop in appetite, mainly due to that pain and straining. Real unevenness in groups, and that can sometimes be the thing that the farmer notices the most, is the variation in maybe body condition score, particularly coat condition, so that those sort of ill thrift groups that never really do that well, that can often cocci has its part to play in those groups. So then, when are they at risk? So the whole life cycle, as we've described, is quite complex, but does take a minimum of 10 days, even when it's sort of at its full rate. So they do have to be older than that, and generally we see the disease between 3 weeks and 6 months. So it is quite a wide range, but particularly around that weaning stress time frame. This can be linked to moving to a different shed and getting exposure to a group that way, or be linked to the nutritional stress around that, just altering that immunity and pathogen load balance. So stocking density also has a massive part to play. This is a fecal oral transmitted disease within the house calf system. You know that stocking density and hygiene are really, really important. So the fecal output of some of these calves that are going through the disease can be massive. So making sure that we are spreading them out and there is plenty of straw for them to lie on is a key in how we can control this disease. Also, thinking about how we can lower that pathogen load is in the environment. We can do an all-in, all-out system. So when the calves have been moved out, we fully clean out all organic matter. So that does include pressure washing to get it off the walls, and then we apply the disinfectants. One of the worst things for this disease is when we add a group, we say only wean off 2 or 3 in a week and we add it to another group. And then the next week we do the same. So each week we're just adding to an existing group, and that can really be a trigger for a cocci outbreak. So in understanding the stocking density and how animals are grouped on farm can be a real key into how we can control this disease. And then we're on to the importance of hygiene. So we're not quite down to scrubbing brushes and rubber gloves, but this is really important into how we can control the disease overall. So we've generally got to lower all fecal oral transmissions, so removing as much muck as we can and strawing that down. Not feeding off the floor can really be important, so sometimes wean groups will just be fed in buckets on the floor, or sometimes milk calves will have their water buckets just on the floor, and you know, they say they're being changed daily. But still we get quite a lot of fecal contamination in those products. So that can be quite an easy win to really start with. And as I put there, water cleanliness is important. And then we come on to the specific things for cocci. We can have the specific disinfectants, which we'll cover next. Also things such as resting pens. So if you were, say, designing a new milk building, then allowing a sort of 2-week period for them to be weaned, allow the farmer to totally clean out those pens and allow a week's rest is a real good way in trying to get around that all-year calving all-in system. So allowing a once-a-year deep clean is really important, but equally a 1-week rest period before the next calves go in, because UV light can actually really help in the disinfectant of the cocci. So as I said, I would just touch on some of the more specific disinfectants. Some of them are quite specific to what your milk contract will allow, so do check with those. But here's some of the examples of ones that I commonly use on some of my farms. So we've got our kill cocks. It's really important for all of these products to follow the set dilution rates. So some of them are at percentages, as shown here, and some of them are at, say, the biosast, which is in the 1 part in 30. So they sometimes put it a bit differently, but make sure we are following that, and equally that we are allowing good contact time. So some of them are foams, some of them are more liquids, but also they need all the organic material to be removed first. So it's almost pointless to be spraying some of these on maybe a gate that's still covered in some manure anywhere. We need to be pressure washing that off before we can put the disinfectants on. But targeting the housed calf, this is really important, and this can be a real big part in our overall control of the disease. We are at a massive advantage compared to, say, the lambs on ewes in pasture, which obviously this isn't applicable to. And then just going back to one of the ways I can assess not only hygiene but straw cleanliness is about the nesting scores. So here's a picture that I commonly use. So we really want those calves to be able to nestle into the straw, and that will mean that we've got less fecal oral contamination. But also this has other benefits, such as keeping the calves warmer in winter and also stopping the drafts. So actually nutritional stress can be quite a cause for these cocci outbreaks. So by lowering the stress on these calves, by keeping them that bit warmer, by keeping them dry and out of drafts can also help. And how we can group animals. So pre-weaned, we really don't want any bigger age ranges in a group than really 2 weeks. Also group numbers, really we're targeting at a maximum of 15. A lot of people aim for 10, but with the machine feeding systems to make the full efficiency out of them, I think with good protocols and good stockmanship in place, 15s can work really well, but making sure they're still within that 2-week age range, because the risk of going over that is the calves that are older are getting their own immunity because their colostrum has dipped, and then you're adding new calves into that. Post-weaning, we do have a bit more leeway there, and I think a 4-week age range can still be quite work well, and that's often then mixing 2 groups together. So again, not this drip effect of more calves being added to that group, because that links to the social stress, but also from a disease exposure point of view. If, say, you weaned a group 3 weeks ago, they're then shedding quite a lot of the coccidiosis, and then to the calves that are then added in, those calves then 3 weeks later, that environment has already got quite a high pathogen load. So how do we test for it? Well, it's quite easy to run a fecal sample. We want a good selection of the group if we're doing it as a monitoring for a group, or if we've got a specific clinical case in mind, we can just take that individual animal. You can run it in-house, similar to a fecal egg count, sort of the same method, and microscope levels can spot them, and again then sending them off. This is really important from a speciation point of view. I think from a monitoring point of view, speciation is definitely required. If you think you've got clinical disease and already seeing the signs and just wanting to confirm it with a test, then probably you already know that if a count comes back high, then it is a pathogenic one. Some work done by Owen Atkinson did show, however, that most of the samples taken were of the E. bovis, one there of 73%, which is one of our clinical ones. So again, a little bit different to lambs. Generally, if you're seeing any signs of disease, then it is going to be that one. So when you use how you categorise them, or whether you send them off or do them in-house, then that can be a bit of a variation there. So going into treatment options, I have allowed plenty of time for this to try and make sure we cover this quite in depth. So actually, when we've got a positive result, either because we think the calves are at high risk and we've sent it off for speciation and it's come back positive, or we're on a farm with a clinical case, actually those situations might be treated a bit differently. So say if we've got a clinical case in these animals, we've been called out to see a sick scouring calf, we've done it quickly in-house and we've seen cocci, then we can be pretty sure that it is a pathogenic cocci. So we're going to treat that the whole group has been exposed. They might be in the pre-patent period, so have been exposed to it but not yet shedding the oocyst, or they might just be a more resilient animal. It's maybe not quite under the stress of some of the other animals, so it could still be shedding but not showing the clinical signs. So it's really important to treat that whole group, anything that's been exposed, as they may be subclinical or they could be in the pre-patent period. So what options have we got? We've got the oral drenches, so the trazodone or the dicrazolol. When we can use either of those can vary. When we've actually seen one clinical case, I don't think it particularly matters, because we know that they're already sort of similar stages of the disease, so the whole timing issue is less vital, whereas we do have to remember that the dicrazolol does have no residual action, so making sure the timing of that is really important. Or you have the in-feed preparation. So going through the other options, so that's if we've seen a clinical case. The other option is the ongoing monitoring and managing. So if we've sent it off for speciation and it's come back positive, even though we're not seeing clinical disease, this could be because the calves are a lot more resilient and we are managing that pathogen load better. I still think because we've got the result of a clinical species, then we can still go ahead and treat all that are exposed, again thinking that they're probably in that subclinical disease stage. Here, the trazodone is probably more preferable because we're not quite sure which stage of the disease this group is at. In calves compared to lambs, the in-feed option probably is used slightly more. So this is when we need 1 milligram of dicocronate per kilo of body weight per day for at least 28 days. So generally this is done on a mix of 1.67 kilos, so that's the 6% decox premix into each ton of creep feed. Calves do need to be eating quite well, so we still need that pathogen load to be managed. Expecting a, say, pre-weaned calf of 3 to 4 weeks old, when it's maybe receiving up to 10 litres of milk, to be eating enough to get that rate is probably expecting quite a lot of that treatment. So again, it's balancing it with that. Again, some people find quite a weaning stress, so if they're abruptly weaning, they still might not be eating that 2 kilos per head that they require to get that treatment rate. So that's the treatment rate of decox in feed. They do also offer a preventative dose, so that's half the rate. Again, in places where you've maybe got the pathogen load under control, this can work quite well, but you do have to think about the calf as a whole. Is where are they now getting their exposure and therefore immunity? So one of the downsides of the in-feed treatment is that it actually works too well, in that their calves then don't get exposed to the cocci and don't build their own immunity. So say you're keeping this on this feed as your weaner mix until, say, 6 months, then actually you can see cocci in older animals when they come off the decox in-feed treatment. So as we all know, and hopefully all agree on, is prevention is better than cure. So we've gone through that one sick group which had the clinical case in. Now we're thinking down the line, you know, this is 3 months later maybe. We still know cocci is present in the environment, but how are we going to deal with it now? So we can still do the drenching before clinical signs are expected. We do have to remember things such as the pre-patent period, so things like testing, we do have to bear that in mind. This can work really well if it's linked to a specific time frame, such as a week after weaning, we always get this kind of scour. Actually, you know, that treatment dosing can work really accurately from that, or sometimes it's linked to a specific shed. So when we use the calving shed around the back, because we're tight of space, they always get it in that shed. Again, that can be really a useful thing to really target those animals at exactly that time. Again, remembering that the trazodone does have that longer action, so it's less precise when we need to go in. So a lot of people are saying, well, we're weaning them, then get a problem. Can't we just treat them at weaning? Well, with the trazodone, you can. With the dictrazodone, you do need to wait that 2 weeks until the cocci have gone through a life cycle to then treat. So again, that can be another handling which a lot of farmers don't like and causes a lot more stress on those animals. So with the trazodone having that bit of longer action, if you know it's linked to a shed or a specific action such as weaning, then you can do it at the time, knowing the action will still be there throughout that first life cycle of the cocci. And then you've got the in-feed dicocronate. Obviously that can be started from when the feed is first given to the calf, so from day 2 hopefully. They won't be taking in enough until probably weeks 6 and 7 on a weaning at 10 weeks of age basis with a gradual weaning. So you do have to bear that in mind. And then that can be continued until you feel that the calves are strong enough in themselves to then face the cocci. They will have to face it at some time, and we're just trying to carry them through until we think they're resilient enough to face it. So that can be done with the in-feed dicocronate at prevention or treatment levels. As I said, they don't eat a huge amount early on, so if we're really thinking about that weaning stress cocci, then we want to be going in at the treatment levels just to get that higher percentage, so they're eating as many milligrams as they need, even though they might not be eating kilos of calf mix. And we still need to gain their exposure to get their immunity. Otherwise it can lead to clinical disease in sometimes year-old or older animals, so we have to bear that in mind. So still on the thread of prevention is better than cure. Hopefully, if we're managing this quite well, over time the pathogen load should lessen. So that amount of challenge that these calves are facing, if we're controlling it group after group, we're really attacking the disinfection between groups, it won't roll it out to nothing, but it should bring it down. Equally, we're getting the stocking density right, so the fecal oral transmission is lessening, and we're using enough straw to try and lessen that risk. That should help, but remember that unsporulated oocysts can last for years. So once we've had definitely a clinical case, or even if we've done monitoring and speciation has found a clinical species of cocci there, I don't think you can ever say it's been eradicated from a farm. We can just control it. So hopefully over time we've brought down that one side of the weighing scale saying the pathogen load. Another way we can do it is by increasing our resilience or the immunity aspect. So generally we always find that it's worse the end of winter coming into spring. I think this is often linked to the energy deficit these calves are in when it's cold and wet. So if we're thinking, you know, a calf, we're expecting it to grow about 1 kilo a day, we're expecting its immune system to develop. You know, we're expecting a lot of these animals. If we're doing it on the traditional 2 litres twice a day, so maybe you're lucky if you get 600 grams of powder a day, you're not going to be achieving that. You know, unfortunately, nobody's a magician. You can't put only 600 grams in and get 1 kilo out. So we do need to be feeding these calves appropriately, particularly through those colder, wetter winter months. As I said, linking to stocking density, I think that risky time of end of winter and spring, they're often when the sheds are at their fullest, just because we've continued to calve in this all year round pattern. So the stocking levels are often getting tight, and often it's linked to when straw is beginning to get a bit sparse. So is it going to be a wet April and May? Are we afraid of that? And are we going to use straw a bit less sparingly? Equally with the prices the last few years, I think people are more aware of the cost of straw, but really the cost of disease can be a massive problem too. So through this, I think we've really focused on how we can control the cocci within the group, but what about that individual sick animal that we're often called out to treat that really starts the problem off? We do still need to take care of that individual. So the key is the supportive treatment. So we really want to make sure fluids are going in. This is a scouring dehydrated calf. Making sure we've got nutrition going in as well, which can be a different thing or a similar thing if they're still on their milk diet. And the difficult thing is, unfortunately, I can't put in a syringe for any farm, is the TLC. These calves do take a lot of nursing to come back right, so the scour can continue for quite a while. As I've described, the gut damage can be quite massive with those ulcers, you know, as these bombs have gone off as the oocysts have emerged. So it does take time for the gut to heal. Luckily, guts heal relatively well compared to lungs, but we do sometimes see scar tissues. It takes a lot of time for those calves to start putting weight back on again. And it's difficult to know after a severe case of cocci whether their food conversion rates will ever come back to what they were pre-cocci, so it can affect that. Also, the stary coat and the poor body condition can stay around for quite a long time, so people using way bands, the bands that go behind the shoulder around the calf, they can be altered quite a lot by cocci because actually the frame will continue growing, whereas the body condition will often be lacking. As I hinted at, sometimes these food conversion rates aren't quite as high as what we would be expecting. So cocci can have some more long-term effects on calves. I touched on there the fluids and nutrition of the sick calf. I think if it is in the pre-weaning calf, then we should be aiming for about 8 litres of fluid a day, so 4 of those being electrolytes and 4 of those being milk, so we are still continuing the nutritional aspect. In the post-weaned calf, it can be more challenging. I think often IV fluids are required, particularly if they are unable to stand, which sometimes these Coxie animals are. Also, sometimes you have to bring in the welfare and economics of these calves, and sometimes, unfortunately, the put to sleep of the first few cases may be the most useful thing, and controlling the disease as a whole, as we've spent most of the time discussing, is often the best use of the farmer's money. So one of the things they wanted me to go through was some of my top tips from a Coxie point of view. I think one of the most important is to always have it at the back of your mind. I think we always think of it as that, really obvious clinical case, whereas actually it often has a part to play in these groups that just aren't performing as well as they should be. Unfortunately, I don't think as many farmers are weighing that should be, and this is one of the key signs that we see, is that their weight gain per day just isn't what they should be, even if they're eating as much and they're just not converting. So unfortunately, that's one of the best ways to get into this sort of a problem, is to get farmers to weigh animals. But also you get those range of groups, as I touched on earlier. So when we get a range of body conditions or a range of sizes, then that's when I think we need to take the samples and send them off for speciation to really see what we're fighting against. And if we know Coxie is there, then hygiene and overstocking cannot be overlooked. So we can put in the most foolproof protocols from a treatment point of view going, but unfortunately if hygiene is still poor or stocking density is still too high, then we're really fighting a losing battle. So focusing on those is really, really important. And then where I commonly see it is linked to this, the weaning stress. And it is really complex. Is it moving shed? Is it nutrition? Sometimes they're moving farm. It can draw in a lot of things, including the social stresses. So really thinking through and really taking a really accurate history of what a calf does is really important. And trying to pull apart what you think is the things you can really help the farmer improve on can sometimes actually really crack this Coxie ongoing problem. So unlike I think more of the sheep and maybe seasonal calves, is it's very, very seasonal, or it's all focused on this time. From the all year round, either dairy or calf rearer point of view, is that gradual build up of pathogen load to the farm as a whole, and how we can crack that, and then the whole idea of bringing it back down to a group and when we can treat them and what treatments we can give. So it is quite complex, the Coxie issue, as is the weaning stress. So they are some of my top tips that I wanted to hopefully share with you today. And just to say thank you for listening. And then finally, I have got some papers there. I have linked them in some of the slides, but maybe not gone through them. There's a bit less in calves than in lambs, maybe because, as I said, it's a more gradual problem. But there's some extra reading if you enjoy that. So hopefully that was useful. Thank you.